Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to see yourself exactly as you are? Not the person your family believes you are, not the version your friends recognize, not even the identity you repeat to yourself every morning, but the person that exists beneath every role, every habit, every carefully constructed belief. Most people assume they already know that person. That assumption is the beginning of the illusion. The strange truth is that human beings can spend an entire lifetime studying the world while remaining complete strangers to themselves. We learn history, mathematics, languages, science, technology, and the endless details of other people's lives. Yet the one thing that quietly shapes every thought, every decision, every relationship, and every fear often remains almost completely unexplored: the mind itself. This is why awareness is so rare. Most people confuse awareness with intelligence. They believe that because they can solve problems, remember information, or hold complex opinions, they must also understand themselves. But knowledge about the world and knowledge about the self are two entirely different things. A person can be brilliant and still spend decades repeating the same emotional mistakes. They can build successful businesses while quietly destroying every meaningful relationship. They can appear confident while secretly living under the control of fears they have never questioned. The greatest prison rarely has walls. It exists inside unquestioned assumptions. From the very beginning of life, the mind is learning long before it is capable of understanding what it learns. Every smile you received, every criticism you heard, every moment you felt accepted, every experience of rejection slowly became part of an invisible psychological blueprint. You did not choose this blueprint. You inherited it through experience. Imagine pouring clear water into different containers. The water itself remains the same, yet each container gives it a different shape. The human mind works in a similar way. Consciousness enters the world with extraordinary potential, but experience gradually shapes how that consciousness expresses itself. A child who grows up receiving affection only when achieving success may unconsciously conclude that love must always be earned. Another who experiences constant criticism may silently decide that making mistakes is dangerous. Someone repeatedly ignored may begin believing that their thoughts have little value. Years pass, the child becomes an adult, the memories fade, but the conclusions remain. This is where the unconscious begins exercising its quiet influence. Most people no longer remember the moments that created these beliefs, yet those beliefs continue directing their lives. They choose certain relationships because they feel familiar. They avoid opportunities because something invisible whispers that failure is inevitable. They become anxious in situations that objectively contain little danger because an old, emotional pattern quietly takes control before conscious thought has the opportunity to respond. And because these reactions feel automatic, they are mistaken for personality. I've always been like this. I'm just an anxious person. I don't trust people. This is simply who I am. But what if these statements are not descriptions of identity? What if they are descriptions of conditioning? This possibility changes everything, because if your personality has been shaped by unconscious experiences, then perhaps the person you believe yourself to be is only part of the story. Most individuals never stop long enough to ask that question. Life moves too quickly. There are careers to build, bills to pay, families to support, goals to achieve. Distractions everywhere. The modern world rewards constant movement, but rarely encourages deep observation. Every moment of silence is quickly filled with another notification, another conversation, another screen demanding attention. And something important happens when silence disappears. The voice beneath the noise becomes impossible to hear. That the unconscious rarely announces itself through logic. It speaks through repetition, through unexpected emotions, through dreams, through irrational fears, through strange attractions, through moments that seem insignificant until they happen again and again. Have you ever noticed how some people continue entering the same kind of relationship despite promising themselves it will be different this time? Why does one individual repeatedly attract emotionally unavailable partners? Why does another sabotage every opportunity just before success finally arrives? Why do certain criticisms linger for weeks while others disappear within minutes? These patterns appear random only when viewed from the surface. Beneath awareness, they form a coherent story. The mind quietly recreates what it already understands. Even suffering can become familiar enough to feel safe. This explains one of the greatest paradoxes of human behavior. People often resist the very change they consciously desire. They say they want peace, yet unconsciously recreate conflict. They long for intimacy, yet fear vulnerability. They dream of freedom, yet cling to identities that no longer reflect who they are. Why? Because certainty feels safer than possibility. The known, even when painful, often feels less frightening than the unknown. This is why awareness requires extraordinary courage, not because it demands learning new information, because it demands questioning everything you have assumed about yourself. Who would you be without the labels you have carried for years, without your profession, without your reputation, without the opinions other people hold about you, without the endless internal story explaining who you believe yourself to be? Most people never investigate these questions because the mind instinctively protects its identity. Identity provides stability. Even a false identity feels safer than uncertainty. This is why genuine self-discovery often begins with discomfort. The moment you begin observing yourself honestly, contradictions appear everywhere. You notice yourself saying yes when every part of you wants to say no. You notice how easily your mood changes after receiving praise or criticism. You notice how often your confidence depends upon circumstances outside your control. You notice how many decisions are motivated not by love, but by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of disappointing others, fear of standing alone. At first, these discoveries can feel overwhelming. It is tempting to look away, to return to the familiar story, to convince yourself that none of this matters. But something remarkable happens once awareness begins. You start seeing the machinery behind your own mind. Instead of becoming every emotion, you begin observing emotions. Instead of believing every thought, you begin questioning thoughts. Instead of reacting automatically, a small space appears between the event and your response. That space changes everything, because within that space, freedom quietly begins to exist, and most people never realize it was there all along. Instead of using that small space, you begin noticing something that has always been there, but rarely receives your attention. The person you present to the world is not necessarily the person you truly are. At first, this idea sounds almost absurd. After all, how could you spend years living inside your own mind and still fail to recognize yourself? Yet this is precisely what happens to countless people. They do not become dishonest because they intend to deceive others. They become strangers to themselves because they slowly adapt to the expectations surrounding them until adaptation feels like identity. Think back to childhood. Long before you understood who you were, you learned who you were expected to be. Perhaps you were praised for being quiet, so you learned to suppress your opinions. Perhaps you were admired for being responsible, so you convinced yourself that asking for help was a weakness. Perhaps you discovered that expressing sadness made others uncomfortable, so you buried your emotions beneath a smile. Or perhaps you learned that success earned love, while failure earned silence. None of these lessons were written down. No one handed you a rule book explaining how to become acceptable. Instead, they were absorbed through thousands of ordinary moments, through approval, criticism, attention, disappointment, and expectation. Like water slowly shaping stone, these experiences formed an identity that felt increasingly natural. Eventually, you stopped questioning it. You simply became the person everyone expected to see. This is one of the most fascinating abilities of the human mind. It does not merely adapt to its environment. It begins believing the adaptation is its true nature. A child who spends years pretending to be fearless may grow into an adult who genuinely believes fear does not exist within them. A person praised for always being strong may become incapable of admitting exhaustion. Someone admired for their kindness may spend decades suppressing anger because it no longer fits the image they have built. From the outside, these qualities appear admirable, but every identity has a hidden cost. Whenever one part of the personality is exaggerated, another part is pushed into the darkness. The stronger the image becomes, the more energy is required to maintain it. Imagine an actor who has performed the same role every day for 30 years. At first, they know they are acting. Every movement is deliberate, every line is rehearsed. But as the years pass, the distinction between the role and the actor begins to fade. Habits replace intention. The performance becomes automatic. Eventually, the actor no longer remembers who they were before stepping onto the stage. Many lives unfold in exactly this way. People wake each morning and immediately step into their role. The successful, professional, the perfect parent, the dependable friend.